thank you guys for joining us for the Digital Onboarding Summit. I'm really glad you could make it. I know you've been in between a couple of moves, and it was great that you could join us. To start, it'll be amazing to just give a little background about yourself and talk about, where you are and what's gotten you here.
Sure. Thank you so much for including me in your summit. I feel very honored and privileged to be here. And it's great because it's not like I don't know you. I feel very comfortable being here because I've worked with you for quite a few years. Right now, I am in between jobs, to be very transparent. I just left a position at T-Mobile as the HR director, supporting the marketing and home and entertainment teams. And I have this lovely break right now before I start at Facebook. And with that, the reason why I took a longer break than usual is because I had to move. And this is my second move in 2 years. One was from New York to Seattle, and then from Seattle to Silicon Valley, which is where I am right now.
All right, great, amazing. So that's been a transition in some way from the East Coast to Seattle and then to San Francisco. So just to kind of get into it, I'm very curious. In the time you've been in that field of HR that we're going to be talking about, what have you noticed that has changed in organizations as well as in employees who are looking for jobs or joining organizations?
Yeah, in preparation for our meeting today, I thought about a bunch of things, and I went all the way back. And coming back to Silicon Valley, I grew up in Japan and Silicon Valley, both places, both countries, I should say. And it brought me back to how my father went through onboarding into a different country. He worked for Panasonic for years and years, decades, I should say. And he was brought from Japan in Osaka, which is where the Panasonic headquarters are, to Silicon Valley in the very late 70s and 80s. And I remember the package that he received. And as a kid, I was in second grade, and as a kid looking it over, it gave him tips on how to assimilate into the American culture. It was so detailed that it actually went into like how to eat ice cream in a way that Americans find it pleasant.
Wow.
It was phenomenal. And the focus back then, and I think to me too, in the last couple of, maybe like the last decade or so, the focus of onboarding into a different culture, and every company is a different culture, has been really about assimilation. If we're lucky, it's been about acculturation. And a little bit of a difference between assimilation and acculturation in my mind is that assimilation is about like how to get into that culture. Mm-hmm. It doesn't even matter where you're from or who you are. Acculturation is a little bit more of a middle ground, and of how do the two cultures of who you are get into the culture that we're going into. And I think most of it has been about assimilation in the past. I think we're slowly evolving into more like it's more of a equal process versus going into the culture of the company or the country in and of itself. I feel that coming back to Silicon Valley, like the onboarding of immigrants into the culture of the country or the city. Yesterday, I went to my daughter's parents' evening, going back to school, and it was the focus of that is so much about like how to bring about kids individually and together at the same time. That was never talked about when I was growing up here in Silicon Valley. It was about like, it was, it's really interesting. It's like, we all want to belong. And the principal, who is fabulous, talked about in middle school, where my daughter is going into, everyone wants to be different, but also belong. And I thought, well, that's how we all are.
Yeah.
As grown-ups, that we feel that way. And that's how we feel as human beings. And that's what makes us uniquely interesting and different than robots. And I thought about, okay, let me think about my most recent onboarding, which was at T-Mobile. It's about a year and a half ago. And I asked my then manager, who's no longer there, she retired, great person. a month into my job, I said like, okay, what is my focus from your perspective? And one of the things that she said that I need to do very quickly was to team mobilize.
Mm-hmm.
And great advice. I wanted to respect the culture of T-Mobile. It's actually a very inclusive, very happy, very employee-centered culture that they have. And so I thought, yeah, totally respect it. It's one of the reasons why I chose to be there. I get it. I want to be a T-Mobile employee, which was what I did for the first 6, 7, 8 months. And which was good because I understood the cultural ways of which the company operated and valued. At the same time, looking back now, it took me way longer than I needed to, I think, because then to realize what my actual value to the company was. Right. And the value that I really brought to that company was how different I was. That I came from New York. I hadn't lived in Seattle. I came from a completely different culture of advertising and marketing versus telecommunications. I brought that I'm Asian. All of that was quite different from the culture of the HR department as well as the client groups that I supported at T-Mobile. And it took me a year to be comfortable and to know that that's the value that I bring. And so looking back, I wish I could have known that earlier, that team mobilizing is really important, that a culture that I want to get into. At the same time, like really, really knowing and being confident that the difference is my value and that it makes the work and the teams and our internal clients better for being different. I think the only reason I was able to get there in a year, and years long and short, however way you look at it, is because at the end of the day, I thought about this a little bit. I thought, like, how did I get there? Knowing that my difference is not bad, but actually really valuable. At the end of the day, it became like the people I worked with. And like a repetition of, I worked really closely with the CMO, really great person. He kept on asking me, he's like, how do you see it? Like, what's your perspective on this? Like, are we too like T-Mobile about thinking about this? And he would look to me in a table full of executives that were, I don't know, 3 levels above me and asked for my opinion. And I thought, and he kept on doing that. And I think that's the repetition of that. And my manager always saying like, well, what do you think about this? How did you do it in New York? Or how did you think about this in a different startup, more startup e-commerce place? I think, it wasn't just once for sure. Yeah. It was like months of that made me feel individually more comfortable and that I bring value. It's actually quite simple when you think about it, theoretically.
Yeah, it makes me think whether it's your responsibility as an individual to realize what value you're adding, or it is important for the company to explicitly kind of tell you that this is what we're looking for. And the thing is, a lot of these things are implicit, right? They're not really, maybe the way you look, yes, you look Asian, but you've grown up in the US, so you also have a lot of American values, beliefs, etc. So I wonder if like isolating that and saying you want your perspective because you have a different one is a good thing or a bad thing. And I think in some cases it could be good or bad, right? Because like you said, we want to be recognized as individuals, but we also personally want to belong to the group. So by separating that, and it's very interesting. I'd love to kind of follow up at some point and understand how your daughter's school is beginning to do that, because there's so many lessons to be learned just from that.
Yeah.
So, no, that's really interesting.
Going back to the question about onboarding is that, yes, I do believe that it has to be explicitly said. It helps. that, hey, you're hired because of your individual uniqueness.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how we as a company are going to get better, because everything, all the studies prove that difference makes better ideas.
Mm-hmm.
If the goal of the company is more about productivity and assimilation and quick productivity,
Right.
this stuff won't matter. Assimilation should be the only thing that matters, but that work is being taken away by machines. Humans don't have to do that anymore. And so in order for companies to become more valuable, it is going to be about ideation and creativity. And for that to become quicker, like to bring that about in people who join a company, then it has to be set up the upfront that like your difference is what makes us better.
Mm-hmm.
And we want you to be who you are in all the different ways that you are from the people that you work with. And at the same time, these are some of the values, core values that this culture has that we want you to know about, because it'll make it easier for you to understand it. So yeah, on the onset, I think we talk in onboarding about the company a lot, and we superficially say diversity and inclusion. That I shouldn't say superficially, but it comes off superficially as a new employee because we're all nervous and we're trying to take it in. But like that, the uniqueness about the individual and the difference is so many different aspects of an individual, I think has to be said over and over, just like blanket wise as a company. But my point about the manager and my partner that I had is that like it has to be reiterated first 3 months, ongoing, and then into the 6 months. Like it has to be part of like, have you actually talked to your new employee about how their difference brings goodness to the company or the creativity to the team? I think it has to be done.
Yeah, and one of the things I've always kind of believed is that when you join a company, or when a new employee joins a company, that's the best time to get their opinion, right? Because it's even pre-assimilation, because that's when you're getting that complete cold view of how the person views every single process. Like every time you walk into the company, how are you being greeted? What is the vibe? When you start going to meetings, what is the meeting culture in that company? Is that something to learn from? Is that something different? Like I almost feel like we should give new hires these diaries to just become ethnographers for the first week in some way, instead of us learning about them, which also happens, which should happen from the team's perspective.
Yep.
The role of a new hire initially should actually just be to create these diaries and give it over to the managers or HR, because it's such a great way to get somebody to, one, even learn, but also to then share their perspective about something.
That you hit a nail on the head about like onboarding on the manager side, right? So as a manager, I think it's one of the things that we as just people who manage people miss is and in my profession in HR, what you just said about new people is when we get the best of their different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be surprised to find how little managers actually say that. They're so concerned. Most managers are so concerned about bringing the new person and assimilating them to their company culture that they miss that opportunity. I've worked with so many different managers in my HR career over almost 2 decades. And it's only a handful of people who say like, I want to get them when they're new because they're going to give us the best perspectives. It's hundreds of managers, maybe literally a handful. So that's an opportunity for companies to really help their managers embrace what's great about onboarding new people. And like, that's within onboarding, literally. It's like, what have you found? And bringing that into like a diary, almost like every week when you check in with your new employee, like ask them for new opinions and actually, right to your point, like write it down because we're going to forget about it. Yeah.
Do you have any anecdotes from any kind of company that you work with where having this difference in opinion from a new employee or any other thing has maybe changed some things in the company? Is there anything that you can remember? Or
Yeah, I think where we work together at RGA was, I think, one of the best places for that. It's I think one of the best things that are about RGA is that there was such an innate respect for different perspectives, and that came from the fact that different disciplines had such respect for each other. Producers respected creatives, and client services respected producers, and even within like creative, like copywriters respected experience designers. And so the whole premise of the company was like, how do we respect their in-depth differences?
Yeah.
And it was rather it was part of the culture, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that technology was also quite important in the company. What I mean by that is technology becomes irrelevant the next day, some technologies.
Mm-hmm.
And when we live with that, it keeps us humble. And with humbleness and humility, it keeps us so much more open to other people and different ideas. To that point, I think it's such a onboarding, an inclusive environment has to do with something that's exceptionally human, and that culture has to be comfortable with itself, comfortable and confident and kind, to be able to say difference is awesome. And that's just like internal work that we all have to do.
I found there's many different types of organizations, but in my work experience, I've realized that, there's, let's say, the consultancy world or the companies whose essential value is the diversity of thought of people, ideas, etc. So like an RGA, where you kind of creativity and the creativity coming from the people is important. And then there is the other side of companies, which are essentially companies that are brands themselves, where their product actually is something other than people, and people are helping them get there, right? And in some way, what I've realized, and again, this is in my kind of small experience, is that, let's say, a consultancy or a company that essentially has people as a product tends to focus on nurturing that a lot more. The talent essentially is what you're providing your clients. And a company that creates a product, whether it's a soap or a phone, they tend to focus on making sure that the soap or the phone is really kind of made perfectly, and sometimes tend to ignore the fact that actually the people who are behind that are the ones who need to be focused on. And then your soap and phone, and I don't know why I have those examples, are the ones that are good, right? So have you noticed that difference? Because you've gone between those two worlds as well. What is that kind of cultural difference, and should there be?
There is definitely a difference. What was interesting about working at T-Mobile is that they were successful because even though the bulk of the employee population was doing repetitive work, a lot of repetitive work, their focus was, how do we make it more human? How do we make this repetitive work that could be ones like customer care is a great example, that could be one day very soon taken over by machines, and a lot of companies already do that. Like how can they leverage human beings to do it better, to make them better services, better company, better brand? And they went about it by focusing on human beings. And so they celebrated people like no other company I've ever seen. So literally onboarding a new employee into a customer care center is like you being celebrated as a person. You literally get showered glitter. Like it's like, wow.
I'm going to go and have a day one in the customer center.
It's like, it's good to be, it's good to be here. It really feels that way. And I think we don't know yet, if that's going to become much more productive. Like the initial result of that is that it is actually customer satisfaction went up significantly when they started to really focus on human beings as being human beings. At the same time, I think when we think about like new ideas or how to improve something in the headquarters away from those areas, I did see a significant difference between exactly what you said, like the consulting world where people are it, their ideas are what they sell, versus the products that a different company might sell. I think to your point, to your question about should it be the same or should it be different, I think it should be the same. The reason why I say that is because the people building those products and programming those products, that work will go away. Yeah. That will be taken over by computers. And so if we're not building companies to celebrate and give and to bring out the best in human beings and to focus their strength on ideation and creativity, then we wouldn't have anything for the machines to build. That's going to be taken care of. So culture should be about how to focus on the best of human beings.
Now, I'm curious, when we talk a lot about culture, one of the things that comes up is how do you explain culture to somebody, right? Because culture is pretty nebulous, and it's mostly about those small habits, behaviors, and ceremonies that happen. But the challenge when you're talking about it to upper management is that it feels very intangible. In your experience, I'm sure you've gone through multiple conversations like this, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think what sometimes fundamentally is missing, and is the different layers of cultures. I mean, academics talk about it, that there's so many different levels of cultures, but we don't talk about it in the workplace, like almost at all. It's fascinating, isn't it? It's like, because we focus so much on the company culture versus the individual culture.
Or productivity.
Yeah, exactly. And so when we talk about culture, or when we think about the culture that the individual brings to your company, it's like, let's take for me as an example. I'm a woman. I am Asian. I'm also Japanese. I'm also Japanese, but a Japanese person who grew up in two countries. And I'm a New Yorker. And in New York, I was in education. So educational culture comes into me. And then advertising, where I worked as well. Those are the cultures, urban, diverse, also biased because I spent like 10 years in advertising. And that's what I bring, which is so many different layers. And then I'm jumping in with my latest experience with T-Mobile into the culture of Seattle, Pacific Northwest, fundamentally very different from New York City. So different in so many different ways. Seattle, a suburb of Seattle, which was Bellevue, which is where T-Mobile is headquartered. And then it's the telecommunication industry. And it's a subsidiary, very independent subsidiary of Deutsche Telekom, which was a government-owned company, and so it's the industry, it's the company, it's the race and ethnicity, gender, all that. There's so many different aspects of culture, and it's different for every single person that we onboard.
Yeah, and the thing is, because there are so many differences, I think it becomes harder for people to figure things out, and that's when you kind of lean towards the average, right? And I think that's one of the challenges when the good thing is there's a lot of differences, but when, let's say, you talk about the process, the people who are creating processes, it becomes almost, it becomes super hard for them to make sure that they're catering to everybody's needs. What would be a good approach to do that and make sure that people are acknowledged for their differences?
It's a really, really interesting point that you're bringing. One of the things that I've been thinking about, and since I was working at RDA, because there's so many different people from so many different backgrounds with different strengths and disciplines, that I think exactly to your point, like average doesn't work. and a really wonderful technologist, Will Turnage, that we used to work with together at RGA, introduced me to this concept by Todd Rose, who wrote the book End of Average. And one of the introductions, and it's been so eye-opening and really fundamental to the way I think about human resources, including onboarding, is that average doesn't work. And one of the things that he talks about at the very beginning of the book is that they used to build, I think it's in the Navy, they used to build cockpits for pilots, taking the average measurements of pilots. Mm-hmm. And so when they did that, there used to be a ton of crashes because the cockpit actually never fit anyone.
Right.
And they realized that, and they built it and designed the cockpit so that it's more flexible and fitting for different sizes of pilots. And when that thing did that, crashes decreased.
Wow.
And yeah. And
that's such an interesting tweak and insight.
Isn't it? And that's one of the things that we need to understand as human resources professionals, is that every single person comes to a new company with different expectations, different hopes, different, obviously, strengths and weaknesses. And we have to meet them where they are. And if we don't do that, the crash rate will increase. And that's really, and so it's hard to do that as a process, as an overall process. So it really becomes important for the manager to always know that they need to be flexible in tweaking and looking out for those differences that those people bring in. As a process, yes, I think one of the things that we can put in is to remind that manager of that. Mm-hmm. Hey, that person that just joined probably is very different from you and from the other people that are on their team. How are they different? How can we actually leverage that? Mm-hmm. How can we help them with that? Those are probably prompts that could, as a process, could be useful as a reminder.
Yeah, no, it makes me kind of now think about, I think the way onboarding has been done, it's been done more from a, I wouldn't say top-down perspective, but unidirectional perspective, right? Hey, you're coming into this company, so here's what you should know about us, and here's how we do things, here's how we work, here's how our people, come to work, etc. And it makes me kind of think about shifting that slightly, or almost adding a level of conversation. So then onboarding is not about you learning one way. It's about facilitating the right conversation so that you share a little bit, and then you tell me a little bit, and then you share a little bit, and then I learn a little bit. So the organization's learning. So while I'm being onboarded into the organization is being onboarded into my ways of working, thinking, and doing. And I think that's definitely an interesting kind of takeaway for me to kind of make sure that anytime we think about onboarding from Tidy's perspective and we're working at different companies, we need to facilitate a conversation as opposed to just deliver information.
Absolutely. And that's exactly right. And that's where the experience becomes better, right? When we're constantly interacting with each other. And that concept of people come in with different expectations or different hopes or different needs. It's I learned that from experienced designers. Mm-hmm. So I'm listening to them okay, if we're listening to consumers or customers that way, why aren't we doing that for employees? Yeah. Onboarding and beyond. And it's such an easy concept to grasp theoretically, but it's hard to do in action. And so we need those reminders and data points to remind us that this is important.
Yeah, it also changes the way HR fundamentally has been positioned, right? So, talking about that, there's definitely been paradigm shifts in the field of HR itself. And what do you think are the new skills that HR folks are learning and should learn as they kind of continue the shift?
I laugh because I think we're so behind. We've been saying that we need to do this for over a decade. And speaking of culture, it's like we need to understand as a profession the culture of business, one. Mm-hmm. Working in HR, I have yet to meet when I see, let's say if I go to a conference and I meet 100 people, it's very difficult for me to say that vast majority of those people are great business people that understand what the companies or what the industry is trying to do. And that's a business culture that HR people need to be just better at. As one of the things. The second thing is that HR professionals are now starting to talk about design, but it's in design thinking. Yeah. But it's a lot of the times what they're talking about is they don't realize that it's much more simple. That it's about, okay, how do we think about human beings and leverage the unique human aspect of it and make it better for them. It's much more simple than design thinking. And so they'll put like a label on it and they actually miss the point. And they'll forget to go ask the consumer or the employee like what they thought about stuff. It's like, what? Yeah. It's and so like fundamental like human behavior. I think it's important in this day and age to like go back to like our expertise in that.
It's actually less jargon and more simplification. And sometimes when fields try and become more strategic, I think they tend to add more jargon. And I think the same thing happens to design. And I have a huge kind of perspective on having been a designer and now kind of working in the or trying to understand the field of HR, I see so many parallels. I think design has also kind of gone through a journey of wanting a seat at the table, wanting to be taken seriously. And as a result, talking about design thinking, I feel design thinking came into being as its own kind of discipline, was designers trying to prove that, hey, we also add value and we also do a lot of thinking. We're not just the people who draw nicely. We have a lot of strategic insights that come in. And, and that's something that all designers knew they do. And this was just something that was created to show other people that we do have this other aspect to our discipline that, maybe others can benefit from. But now it's gotten commoditized, and it's gotten to a place where it's become jargon, like you were saying. And therefore, it's kind of distanced itself from what the true objective is, which is really just understanding people. And if you're going to take away all the jargon, it's really all about that. So HR kind of needs to just go back to some of those roots of where it started and then start there.
Yeah, that's right. And we need to be fearless and brave to be able to not use jargon, right? That to know that there's value in our profession because no one else is looking at it with people really, really at the center. Everyone else in business, they have to care about other things. And so there is value in the HR profession and only focusing and geeking out about this. Yeah. And because we're professionals at this, that we don't need to use weird words to prove it. We just has to be through what we're trying to explain more simply.
Yeah. No, there's definitely a lot. And I definitely want to write an article about seeing how design's evolved and seeing how HR is evolving, because I do feel like there's something there. And I'd love to send it to you at some point when that happens.
Yeah, fascinating.
That will be great. You've lived in those two worlds as well, so I think you can see those parallels too. It would be great to to share some thoughts on that at a later time. You're going through this transition right now, and I'm curious. And with every new beginning, and in some way you're going to be a new employee, right?
Yeah.
What are you most excited about, in the company you're joining or just in the next phase of your career?
So most excited about is that joining a new company in my age, which is I've worked a lot, many years. Mm-hmm. it's such a privilege to have worked a lot and then going to something new, because I'm nervous in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not afraid. And I think it's also because I left New York City and RGA, which I loved, and went into something so different, and I went through it. And I'm also, I think I kind of know who I am more than I did before. And so I feel like I'm more comfortable being absolutely open to what the new experience is going to offer me, and to be little bit less guarded. And also, I feel like I'll find my way. Like I'm a little bit more comfortable in thinking that, and I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because I wish I could give that to all new employees, no matter where they are in their careers, that like is gonna be okay. And you're awesome for who you are. I wish we could do that earlier. It's harder because, when I look at my daughter going into middle school, it's like, it's hard to do that when you're younger and less experienced, I should say. And I wish I could give her that. And I think it's the same for if I had only worked for a year, like I would be much more nervous.
Yeah. I think what happens in general as human beings, we tend to value the end goals and not the transitions. And like you said, those transitions that we actually find growth, and joining a new company, leaving a new company, moving to a new city, all of those moments are when transitions happen, when you kind of feel unsettled, you kind of feel out of place. And then when you actually feel like you've got a set of friends or a set of colleagues you like, or you feel like you're doing your job better, and that's when you feel like you belong, right? And I think there's always those, you kind of keep going between those phases of feeling uncomfortable and then feeling belonging. And maybe that learning really happens in that transition. And, I think that's maybe one of the things that companies should focus on. How do you kind of guide people to that transition? With T-Mobile, it was that 1 year, and it was those almost invisible nudges that you over time kind of understood. And there might be new nudges in this place that you go to. So that'll be interesting. I'll be kind of very interested in speaking to you maybe a year and a half from now to understand what was it that made you belong and made you feel included in the new company you're in. That'll be a great conversation to have. Yeah,
I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Kaz. This has been such a wonderful conversation and a very different perspective. I feel like we can, continue this conversation, and we should. So I'll be in touch, and looking forward to seeing you soon in New York.
Yes, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate this conversation as well. Thank you.
Thank you.